We're starting to see your VC colleagues kind of fall in line, and I'm wondering why now? Why do you think we see the likes of Andreessen and Horowitz donating to Trump where they haven't supported him before?
Well, I think what you're seeing is that many of my colleagues in Silicon Valley are focused about the future of technology being influenced dramatically by the president's direction. And you're seeing more and more of Silicon Valley leaders very comfortable with the direction that prior President Trump will take the country in terms of the economy and technology, and candidly in terms of business friendliness, job creation, and innovation. But I think the major thing that no one's talking about yet, and you kind of alluded to it, Matt, in your question, is that the economy will be driven by AI for the next decade. And Katie, this is what we talked about back in October, the last time I interviewed with you all. AI will drive productivity. Your prior guest said earnings is what it's all about. Well, AI will drive earnings dramatically of companies across all industries over this next decade. And if you think about startups and an innovation environment, the U.S. has probably never been more aggressive in terms of leadership and technology over the last 10 years, candidly pulling away from Europe and pulling away from China, who actually was in the lead 5 or 6 years ago.
I got to ask you about, well, the great state of Ohio. John, I'm from Columbus. You were born in Cleveland. J.D. Vance is from near, Middletown's near Cincinnati. What do you think about, we refer to him as a former venture capitalist, even though at 38 he's been, a Marine, a law student, a lawyer, a senator. So he's done a lot, but he's been hanging out around Silicon Valley. He seems to be supportive of some of the left's pushes, Lina Khan and Elizabeth Warren. On the other hand, he is fully behind Donald Trump. Is he good for big tech? Is he good for venture capital?
I think he is a very good vice president pick for President Trump. He is from Ohio. As you said, both of us live there and were born there. I'm from West Virginia, is where I was raised. And I think what you see is that part of the country understanding they have to reinvent themselves and have to innovate and make it inclusive across their country, across their states. So I think if you look at really the future of America, you're looking about how some of the states that have not been is inclusive in the growth over the last decade, become candidly a great place to work, a great place to do startups and grow. My home state of West Virginia used to be ranked in the bottom 10 states in every category, from economic growth to standard of living to attracting businesses. Now they're in the top 10 in most categories. And it was a conscious effort by both Republicans and Democrats to change the state at a senatorial level with Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito, at the governor level with Governor Justice, at the Senate and the House level, redoing the universities. And we attracted $6 billion investments into our state in the last 2.5 years. We normally, Matt, wouldn't get $1 billion investment except every maybe 10 to 20 years. So it speaks to states wanting to control their future, and it speaks to innovation. I've never been more optimistic about what tech will do for this country and our ability to lead as a country, and can we partner with countries like India in a very constructive way.
We were talking a little earlier in the commercial break about this prediction you had that M&A would be robust once again, and then you saw that deal news, this idea of a potential $23 billion sale to Google by Wiz, and you wonder what this would mean in a potential Trump administration moving forward. You've had J.D. Vance really say that Lina Khan has been one of the few people in the Biden administration who is doing a pretty good job. Do you think that a Trump-Vance ticket would still mean more clamping down on big ticket deals?
Well, there's probably three questions there. The first one is, do I think M&A activity is going to increase? Yes. And going back, Katie, to our discussion in October, I said the first thing you watch is the stock market. Stock market at that time was going well. We discussed that I thought it was going to do very well as we move forward over the next year. Second thing you watch is M&A activity. And remember how quiet it had been. For VCs, there were very few exits that have occurred over the last, in Canada, it was the slowest time in 10 years this last year. I was fortunate enough to have 2 companies get bought one by AMD and one by Cox Communications, and then more recently one in the defense industry group, and then Rubrix went public. I think you're going to see M&A activity accelerate, and you're going to see large companies, both tech companies and non-tech companies, acquire startups to help kickstart their AI engine. Every company, regardless of industry, is going to go AI. So I like what we see in terms of M&A. It used to be the exception with WhatsApp, a $16 billion acquisition a decade ago. Then OpenAI with an $83 billion evaluation with what Microsoft did. Then your comment about what Google's done with a $23 billion evaluation. I think the sweet spot for your listeners is decacorns are going to come back in vogue. A $10 billion to $100 billion evaluation, which there are only 43 companies in that range today in tech in the U.S., I think will get to be 100 by the end of this decade. So that's where you really create the jobs. But what you're seeing is these companies I just mentioned having 50 to 1,000 employees.
Right.
So you're going to see a birth of a new group of decacorns, and I think that terminology will be back in vogue.
Well, John, of course, that's the M&A piece. I want to talk about IPOs because you think about the conversation we had back in October, talking about sort of the dearth of IPOs, and that continues today. You think about what you're doing over at JC2 Ventures, basically coaching startups. I know that you have about 3 startups that have IPO'd, but why aren't we seeing more of these startups actually go public?
Well, I think it has to occur. Either the markets are wrong with the direction and M&A activity increasing, or we're about to see a leveling off. I'm pretty optimistic on the markets for this next year. So as stocks go up, the IPO market has to kick into gear. But Katie, as I will always do, I want to be very candid. It's very sluggish right now. The M&A activity unsolicited is up dramatically, I think, in the VC world. We're seeing that. VCs are starting to invest more. But I think you're probably at least a quarter or two away before you begin to see the IPO market begin to tick up.
Yeah, I say I was giving a talk over the weekend with Jesse Draper, who runs a VC fund, Halogen, and some of the VCs in the room mentioned that all of the air has been taken out by these big mega cap stocks, right? Why invest in a little fledgling company, in terms of an IPO when you have the Magnificent Seven? Plus, Shinali is always talking to these people in private credit who seem to be offering alternatives to companies so that they don't have to go public as soon as they had to in the past. Do you think there's a structural shift here?
No, I don't for the long term, Matt. And I like the question. You've set me up in a very good way. I think M&A activity always increases before the IPO market. If you really look, I think a number of companies are getting set up for the IPO market on it. And I think you'll see it play out as before, exactly what we talked about last October. Stock market goes up, M&A activity, VCs free up a little bit more. You begin to fuse some IPOs, VCs bet more. But right now, the money going into AI startups are huge, and I think you're going to see a very active IPO market in the next year if I were betting.
Well, let's talk about some of that money. You wrote recently that 38% of venture capital in the U.S. in the first quarter went into AI stocks. John, I have to say I'm a little bit surprised that it was only 38%. You think about how much we talk about AI. I mean, if it's not AI, where is that money going?
Well, to your point, that was a surprise to me, too. I think if we watch the second quarter and third quarter, you'll see it move past the 50% level. For VCs that invest in AI-based companies, they pay a 50% premium versus the same business model in terms of economic and financial growth for a company that's in software as a service or fintech on it. I think, using my portfolio as an example, I used to have 6 AI companies when I bet on AI 7 years ago. I have 9 unicorns out of those 20 companies already, been very, very fortunate on it, but all of them will be AI-based. So I think you will see any company, regardless of size, who does not have a good AI strategy, implementation, and differentiation will get left behind. That's what you're seeing fueling these strategic acquisitions, both by tech companies and non-tech, which I think will accelerate on it. So that's a very nice way of saying I think every company will eventually become an AI company, whether you're in manufacturing, automotive, startup, big company, traditional company. Those countries that lead in AI will lead in economic growth. I think it will power the stock market for this next decade. It's a nice way of saying I wouldn't invest in a company that doesn't have a good AI strategy.
You know, John, something Matt and I were talking about earlier is why do so many tech titans step up to support JD Vance when he also wants to, or has said previously, break up Google and has been so hard on big tech? I'm wondering if there's something that is more indicative of this feeling. You mentioned decacorns a little earlier. Do people just want more options here besides the Mag 7, these massive stocks that have become really monolithic in some ways?
Well, first, I think those companies have done a great job of driving our market and candidly the U.S. leadership. But to your point, people want competition. They want to make sure the large companies don't misuse their economic power. And we also want that startup and stock market success to be spread across all 50 states, not just resident primarily in a California, a New York, or a Texas type of approach. I think making sure the environment is a level playing field for the smaller companies and startups is a must, in my opinion. So I would look at that very aggressively going forward. I think that's healthy. We've lost a little bit of the confidence and the trust of the American people with the internet and Cisco. 92% of Americans believed in the 90s that technology was good for the country and very good for them personally. Now, as you all know, that's below 50. I think we've got to regain the confidence of the average person in America that it will benefit them for the future. But make no mistake about it, AI is here to stay. Every one of you will use AI in a major way in the next 2 to 3 years in ways that you hadn't dreamed before, and every company will incorporate it as well. So if I were an investor, I'd do a portfolio of AI companies. Are there going to be some spectacular train wrecks? Absolutely, Katie, going to happen. But the benefit of the large group, I think they will outperform the general market. And as I said before, I'd look at that decacorn type category as perhaps being one of the most exciting, the 10 to 100 billion type of range.